Chapter 42. This is getting to be a habit, Altman thought, carefully easing the chunk of rock out of the core sampler. Nobody seemed to notice. They were all too preoccupied with the interior of the bathyscape itself, the wash of blood and gore inside, the quarantined area, the rotten, damaged bodies. Markov quickly had the area quarantined, but not before Altman had gotten away with the sample. Now he took it to his bedroom to examine it. He was certain it was from the artifact itself. It was seemingly ordinary rock, but one that he couldn't identify. The bit he held had an indentation on it, where something had been carved or inflicted on the rock, but it was too small a sample to give a clear sense of what it was. Sneaking into an unlocked lab at night, he tested it. The substance was not unlike granite, but harder, almost as hard as a corundum. The one face was smooth. He could see where the rest had been cut. He was surprised the cutters hadn't burned out. Within the rock he found mineral veins that struck him as too regular to be natural. But if they weren't natural, what were they? In the end, puzzled, he decided to assume they were natural formations. There was no technology that he was aware of that would allow someone to manipulate solid rock in this way. Whatever had happened to the others in the bathyscape, what Markov had been able to determine about it, Altman was never told. Once quarantined, the bathyscape disappeared and was never seen again. No doubt Markov and his inner circle had analyzed it to death. Altman was eager to see the rest of the vid from Hennessy, but his request to Markov was met with silence. Now that the bathyscape was up, the floating compound was frantic with preparations to raise the artifact itself. It was impossible to have a conversation that didn't turn to the monolith lying down at the bottom of the crater, and people seemed both excited and incredibly nervous. Whatever was down there, would change everything, and they would be the first to come into contact with it. The signal had returned, but seemed to be broadcasting differently now, intermittently, on and off, in fairly regular bursts. Some researchers speculated it was a distress call, though who or what was in distress nobody dared guess. Perhaps it was a result of a failing piece of technical equipment, the artifact itself faulty or breaking down. It was, after all, very, very old, and many believed, Altman among them, that it was old enough that it couldn't possibly be of human origin, and that the artifact was clear proof of alien life. If you'd seen it, he told Markov in his debriefing, you'd agree with me. There's nothing human about it. The pulse signal was now interfering with the radios and vids, creating a static communication wave and fuzzing images. Often when he descended in the bathyscape, Altman was out of touch very quickly because of the interference, and stayed out of touch for a good part of the trip. He was piloting descents daily with several members of Markov's inner circle, all of whom showed no signs of cracking. He questioned all of whom and whomever he was with, trying to find out anything he could. Mostly they were closed-lipped, but every once in a while they let something slip. A scientist called him in from the hall while he was walking past the lab, and, thinking he was someone else at first, began asking him questions about a winch mechanism. Was it really enough? Could it lift the thing? And what about the cable? What sort of cable would you need for something like that? Altman played along as he could, finally admitted he didn't know what he was talking about. You're not Perkins? The scientist asked. Altman shook his head. Never mind, said the scientist, retreating quickly into his lab. Forget I said anything. Showalter, too, was almost as much on the outside as Altman, though he knew geophysics well enough that he was somehow consulted. Always just pieces and pieces, Showalter confessed to Altman in a very low voice over coffee. They think if they give me just a little, I won't be able to figure it out. That'd be true if it was just them, but their colleagues sometimes consult me as well. I know more than anybody realizes. And, said Altman, I think they're very close to bringing it up, said Showalter. Almost all the theoretical problems have been solved. A few more tests and they'll be waiting for an okay. Ada had made friends with the medical team, even helping out informally when she was needed, and she was needed more and more. In the floating compound, Ada told him reports of scientists and soldiers beset by insomnia and hallucinations were on the rise. According to Dr. Merrick, she claimed, he's never seen anything like it. Violent incidents of all kinds are on the rise, nearly double what they were just a few months ago. The suicide rate has skyrocketed, and the assault rate has climbed considerably. It's a tense time, said Altman, playing devil's advocate, the role Ada usually would play. Maybe that's all it is. No, you were right. It's more than that, said Ada. Even Merrick thinks so. There are signs of widespread paranoia. People having visions of dead relatives, and more people speaking in a trance-like state of convergence, without being really able to explain what that meant exactly once they were themselves again. Everyone is on the verge of paranoia or panic. God damn it, you've got me thinking like you'd. Altman nodded. Then my non-scientific inquiry was right, he said. Everyone is on edge. Something's going on. What do you think it means? Ada asked him. What does it mean? Said Altman. If you ask me, it means we're fucked. Chapter 43. Altman was on yet another descent, this time with a researcher by the name of Torquato, someone from Markov's inner circle. He had with him a simple black box, homemade, with a single knob on it and a needle readout. The technology was old enough that it could have been made in the 20th century. As they descended, Altman tried to make idle conversation to pass the time. What? He asked. Some kind of scientist? Torquato shrugged. You could call it that, he said. Geophysics? Asked Altman. Geology? Volcanology? Something more theoretical? It's hard to explain, said Torquato. Not very interesting. But Altman was interested. He was descending into the heart of the crater with a man who was being deliberately vague. Something was up. So what brings you down here today? He asked, trying to sound casual. A few measurements, said Torquato. What's the box about? Altman asked. This, responded Torquato, pushing at the box with his thumb. Oh, it's nothing. A few more questions and Altman gave up. They descended in silence down to the artifact and held position just above it. Robotic units had dug out under its base and were well on the way to netting it. The net itself attached to a series of cables that would eventually be hooked to a larger, stronger cables on the freighter. The artifact would be reeled in with the help of the nascent field of kinetic technology. It was to be secured, then brought through the water doors into the floating compound. Beside him, Torquato gave a single knob on his box a counterclockwise twist. The needle immediately came to life, engaging in a rhythmic and regular movement along its graph. Torquato grunted, jotted something on his holopad. What is it? Asked Altman. Said Torquato. Did you say something? When Altman started to repeat the question, Torquato interrupted. Take the bathyscape lower, he said. How much lower? Halfway between the top of the object and its base, he said. Carefully, Altman nudged it down. The black box's needle, he saw, continued to bounce, but its rhythm and scope changed. That's good, said Torquato. Now you can slowly circle around, staying just at this level. I can try, said Altman. He started moving the bathyscape slowly around the monolith, casting glances from time to time at the box. When Torquato noticed him looking, he cast him a withering look, and from then on shielded the readout with his hand. You're here to drive, he said. Nothing more. Look, buddy, said Altman. I'm not stealing any secrets here. I have no idea what that thing does. I'm just trying to pass the time. Torquato didn't bother to answer. Exasperated, Altman turned away, focused on trying to bring the bathyscape within a few meters of the monolith without touching it. When he looked back, Torquato was still covering the readout with his hand. Asshole, he thought. Torquato's turn was different from that of the others, much more abrupt, little, if any, warning. One moment he was sitting there, shielding the black box needle display with his hand, and the next he had attacked. How he'd undone the restraint on his leg, Altman hadn't been able to figure out at that time, though later he discovered it had been cut, whether by Torquato or someone else, he could never be certain. In a flash, Torquato was free. That was all that mattered. Altman tried to get the tranquilizer gun out and fire a dart, but Torquato had been too quick, and when he reached for it, he found the holster empty, the pistol aimed at him instead. He dived to the side, but the pistol had already fired, and there it was, the dart sticking out of his arm. He reached down and, with effort, plucked it out, His tongue already felt thick in his mouth. Torquato was talking to him. He suddenly realized, though he was a little less clear on what he was saying. He blinked and Torquato blurred out of focus, only slowly coming back in again. The man was speaking incomprehensibly, endlessly, about the necessity for convergence. Altman made an effort, bit the inside of his mouth until it bled, succeeded in focusing. "You've been here again and again, just beside it," he said to Altman, stroking his cheek. "Yet you have felt nothing. Don't you hear it calling you? Won't you answer?" When he regained consciousness, it was to find himself pressed up against the observation porthole, the bathscape pushing up against the artifact, with the motor still running until it was tilted on end. There were repeated banging noises coming from somewhere, punctuated by long moments of silence. "It's stuck," he heard Torquato's voice mutter. And then, "I'm trying, I tell you I'm trying." Trying to what? Altman wondered. The banging started again. Altman slowly pulled himself up, standing on the porthole. The cabin felt extraordinarily warm, stuffy. He scaled the side of the console and stood on it. The oxygen recirculator had been disabled. It was nothing but a mass of tangled metal, sparks flying off it. He was careful not to touch it. No wonder the air felt stuffy. How long had he been out? He looked down at the console until his eyes found the chronometer. It, too, had stopped. The ladder leading to the latch was directly above him, horizontal along the ceiling, and he could see Torquato's feet sticking out of the passage. The banging started up again. "Oh shit," Altman realized, his limbs instantly going heavy. He's trying to open the hatch. He's trying to flood the bath escape. He clambered onto the sideways chair and nearly fell when it swiveled. There was a brief groan, and for a moment he thought it was going to come unbolted from the deck, but it held. Carefully, he put both feet on the chair back and stood. From there, he could almost reach the fixed metal ladder. He steadied himself, reached as far as he could, but his fingers just grazed it. He'd have to leap up, hope that his fingers caught the rung and held it the first time so that he wouldn't come down with a crash and alert Torquato. The banging started again, Torquato screeching along with it. Altman jumped, caught the rung. He flailed his leg up and managed to get his ankle around the side rail of the ladder as well. The banging stopped. He hung there motionless, hoping Torquato wouldn't turn around. "It's stuck," he shouted, apparently a nobody. "I'm trying, I tell you." Holding onto the ladder, Altman tilted his head back until he could see Torquato there, upside down. He was lying flat in the passage, a metal bar in one hand, a strut maybe, something stolen from the remains of the oxygen recirculator. His knuckles were bloody, and Altman could see symbols like those on the artifact, painted here and there along the passage in blood. Torquato tugged on the wheel, then gave a little cry of frustration. He raised the bar and started striking the hatch again, at the hinge. The pressure was too great, Altman realized with relief. Unless he loosened the hinge or blew the hatch from the control panel, the seal might hold. Much more worrisome, though, was the lack of air. Torquato stopped, breathing heavily. "A cleansing," he was muttering. "Yes, a cleansing. Start again, new and fresh." He began pounding again. Carefully, Altman started along the ladder, back into the passage. As he got farther up, he had to bend his arms, pull himself up closer to the ladder so as not to brush Torquato's back. By the time Torquato stopped again, Altman was hanging directly over him, their bodies less than a foot away from each other. Altman could smell the man's sour sweat. He held his breath, staring at the ladder a few inches from his face, the muscles in his arms starting to cramp. Torquato kept muttering to himself, laughing softly under his breath. Altman heard the sound of him scrabbling at the hatch, the cry of frustration, then the pounding began again. He let go of the ladder and pushed it off hard at the same time, crashing down on Torquato's back. It hurt like hell. He tried in the confined space to scramble around to face him, but Torquato was trying to get up too, and for a moment his face and chest were pressed up against the ladder. With a shout, he pushed down as hard as he could, and Torquato collapsed underneath him. He started to turn around again, knocking his shoulder against the ladder, and made it this time. Torquato was half turned over now, and groping for the metal bar which had fallen and was under him. Altman grabbed his head by the hair and brought it down hard. Torquato was bellowing now, struggling, trying to slip back and out of the passage. Altman wrapped his leg around him and held on, trying to keep him there, slamming his face into the floor again. Torquato had the bar now and was trying to get up, but his arm was still pinned beneath him. He turned his head as far as he could, trying to look at Altman, and Altman saw his collapsed cheekbone in orbit, the blood that was washing over his eye. He slammed his head down again, and then a second time, until the bars slipped from Torquato's fingers, and his body went slack. Altman lay there on top of him for a while, holding him by the hair, trying to catch his breath. Knocking against the walls, he turned Torquato the rest of the way over, face up. His face was a mess, the nose and cheekbone broken and in a pulp. He held his ear close to his mouth. His breathing was shallow, but it was still there. Now what, thought Altman. What do I do with him? He could tie him up, as he had done with Hendricks, but there was always the chance he would break free. And there's the bigger problem, the lack of oxygen. With the oxygen recirculator broken, he probably didn't have enough air to make it to the surface for one person, let alone two. Am I a killer? Altman wondered. Am I the kind of person who is willing to kill someone so as to stay alive himself? He ran it through his mind again, considering other alternatives, but he couldn't come up with anything. It was either Torquato or him. Torquato, he told himself, would have died anyway if he'd gotten his way and managed to open the hatch, so the choice was either both of them dead or just one of them dead. He looked at the bloody face below him. He'd done that. Maybe he'd had no other choice, but in any case, he'd done it. He was responsible for it. And was about to be, he realized, responsible for more. He reached out and put hands around Torquato's throat. It was sticky with blood. He let his hands lie there, and they very quiet, gently began to squeeze. At first, he thought it would be easy, that Torquato would simply slip from unconsciousness to death without awaking. But after a moment, Torquato's eyes suddenly sprang open. Altman squeezed harder. Torquato's arms began to flail and shake, striking Altman's shoulders and arms. He arched his back, knocking Altman into the wall of the passage, but Altman held on, squeezing tighter. In that last moment before he died, a light came into Torquato's undamaged eye that Altman couldn't help but see. Human, pleading. He closed his own eyes to it, and turned his head to the side. Gradually, he felt Torquato's movement slow and stop. When he finally opened his eyes again, Torquato's eyes had rolled back in their sockets. He was dead. He dragged himself out of the passage, climbed down the wall and onto the console. There, he reversed the screws, bringing the bathscape backward and away from the artifact. It slowly righted itself, Torquato's body spilling out of the hatch passage onto the floor. Altman climbed off the console and to the chair to start the bathscape rising. The lead pellet release was jammed, the panel all around it scarred from where Torquato had dented it. The craft started to rise, pellets slowly dribbling out, but not as fast as he'd hoped. Chances were he'd reach a certain water density and the craft would stop moving entirely, and he'd hang there suspended, slowly dying. He recorded an SOS message, then sent it to Loop and broadcast, asking them to come for the bathscape, to make it rise as quickly as possible. Whether they'd get the message soon enough, he didn't know. He recorded another message for Ada, telling her he loved her, that he was sorry, just in case he didn't make it. He was getting very warm. He wasn't getting enough air. He wondered if the best thing was to go to sleep. He'd use less air that way. He contemplated getting down on the floor of the submarine, thinking the air might be better down there. But he just stayed slumped in his chair, staring at Torquato's remains. And then suddenly, he saw Torquato's hand move. Impossible, he thought. He's dead. He swiveled his chair around so that he could see him better, watching carefully. No, he was dead. He wasn't moving. How could he? And then the hand moved again. Hello, Altman, Torquato said. Go back to being dead, Altman said to him. It's not as easy as that, said Torquato. I need you to understand something first. Understand what? This, said Torquato, and leapt forward. Torquato flew upon him, choking him. He tried to pry his hands off, but they were digging too firmly into his neck. He lashed onto his own hands onto Torquato's neck, squeezing with all he had. Then he blacked out. He became conscious to find his hands around the neck of a corpse. It was rigid and cold. It had been dead a very long time. What's going on, he wondered. He tried to stand up to get away from the corpse, but he couldn't. He moved his fingers away and rolled off, lying just beside it. He hoped he was close to the surface, but there was no way to tell from here. Suddenly he saw something strange. A woman. She looked a lot like Ada, though it wasn't her. It was obvious when he looked close, but maybe it was her mother, back when she had first met her, before she had cancer. But that was impossible, he thought. Ada's mother's dead. I'm hallucinating again, he thought, just like with Torquato. Hello, Michael, she said. Aren't you dead? He asked. How can I be dead if I'm here with you? For a moment he wanted simply to accept that she was saying, but then found resistance welling up within him. Who are you really? He asked. Why am I hallucinating you? Ada's mother didn't answer either question. I've come to give you a message, she said, about the marker. What's the marker? You know what it is, she said. You've come near it again and again, but somehow you've resisted it. She crossed her index and middle fingers, held her hand toward him. The tail of the devil, he said. The artifact, you mean? She nodded. You need to forget about it. The marker is dangerous. Above all, you need to leave it where you found it. I don't know what the hell you're talking about, said Altman. What do I have to do with the marker? Not just you, she said, and spread her arms wide. You, whatever choices are made will affect all of you. She cocked her head in a manner very similar to the way Ada often did. A tremendous pressure built rapidly in his head. Then it was gone. What's the message? Asked Altman. Convergence is death, she said. You must not give in to the marker. You must not allow it to begin convergence. What does that mean, convergence? It means you shall finally begin from the new beginning. The beginning of what? And just me? She said again, spread her arms wide. You, all of you, she said. Then, for a moment, she seemed almost exactly like Ada in the way he found very disturbing. I love you, Michael, Ada's mother said. I'm counting on you. Please help me stop it. Please don't fail. And then, as quickly as she appeared, she was gone. He tried to get up again, fell back. The world around him was growing dark, as if seen through a black veil. Slowly it grew darker still, and then, suddenly, it was gone. Chapter 44. He woke up with an oxygen mask strapped to his face, surrounded by a series of seemingly identical men dressed in white, their faces covered by surgeons' masks. He made it, one of them said. He's alive. Any evidence of brain damage? Said another. Altman tried to speak, but he couldn't get his tongue around the words. One of the doctors put a hand on his shoulder. It was Stevens, he realized. He could recognize him by his eyes. Just relax, he said. You're lucky to be alive. He closed his eyes, swallowed. Then a terrible thought hit him. What if this was just another hallucination? He tried to move his arms, but couldn't. He opened his eyes, looked desperately around. He's confused, he heard one of them say. Disoriented, he doesn't know where he is. What was it she had said? You must not give in to the marker. You must not allow it to begin convergence. He had to tell them. The marker, he whispered. Markov leaned close. The marker, he repeated. The marker, said Markov. What marker? He's talking nonsense. Give him another shot. Altman shook his head, or tried. Whether his head moved or not, he couldn't say. Either it didn't move, or they ignored him. He watched one of them fill a syringe and prime the needle, without being able to do anything about it. He tried to speak, made instead a gurgling, inarticulate cry. He'll be okay, said Stevens, patting his arm. Don't worry, Altman. We're here for you. And then he felt the prick as the needle punctured his flesh. His arm burned a moment, then went numb. The men in white were there for a moment longer, then they slowly blurred and ran together, and finally disappeared entirely. When he came to consciousness again, the room was empty, except for 3 men, Stevens, Markov, and another man from Markov's inner circle whose name he didn't know. He was as large as Markov, but thicker, with a brutal, flat face. They stood at one side of the bed, speaking in whispers impossible for Altman to make out. Stevens was first to notice he was awake. He gestured at him and whispered something. The other 2 stopped talking. In unison, all 3 moved closer and stared down at him. Altman, said Markov, still alive. You seem to lead a charmed life. Altman started to respond, but Markov held a finger up to stop him. He reached down and removed Altman's oxygen mask. Are you feeling up to speaking? Asked Markov. I think so. Altman said. His voice sounded like it no longer belonged to him, or belonged to someone that was him but much older. You remember Stevens, said Markov. This is Officer Krax. Altman nodded. It's very simple, said Markov. I want you to tell me everything. He did, starting with the moment when Torquato had suddenly attacked and moving through to his hallucinations. Tell us more about these hallucinations, said Krax. Does it matter? Asked Altman. They were just hallucinations. It does matter, said Stevens. Indeed, it matters a great deal. So Altman, too tired to argue or make up a lie, told them. When he was done, the three men withdrew to the far side of the room, started whispering again. Altman closed his eyes. He was on the verge of falling back asleep when they returned. For a moment, they just stared at him. Stevens started to say something, but Markov touched his arm and stopped him. I want you to tell Stevens everything from here on out, he said. Any dreams, hallucinations, anything at all out of the ordinary. You contact Stevens right away. This is crazy, said Altman. No, said Markov. It isn't. And then they were gone, leaving Altman behind to brood. He felt more confused and apprehensive than ever. But a few minutes later, the door opened, and a distraught Ada rushed in, and he had other things on his mind. Chapter 45. After nearly dying in the bathscape, it was as if he was living a different life, as if the world he had known had become overlapped by another ghostly one. He began to see more people whom he knew to be dead. His father, sister, a teacher he'd been close to had committed suicide, an old friend killed by a car in high school. They would appear looking nearly as real as anybody, and offer vague and sometimes puzzling messages. Some spoke against convergence, urging him to hurry and focus your attention correctly, as one of them put it, before it was too late. Others spoke of unity, suggesting to him that it was somehow too late, that he had misused the resources given to him and showed no signs of learning from his mistakes. All urged him to leave the marker alone. He told Ada about seeing her mother. At first it made her angry, then it made her cry. But then, a few hours later, she asked him to tell her about the experience in detail. But why you? She asked. Why not me? A day later he woke up in the middle of the night to find Ada staring at him. I saw her, she said, her face radiant. Like a vision. She was as real as you or me. She was standing right over there near the door. What did she tell you? That she loved me. That we all needed to leave the marker alone or forget we ever found it. It must be dangerous or powerful anyway. What do you think the marker is? He explained to her what he knew, described the way the marker had looked underwater. It's all connected, she said. The stories in town, these visions we're having, the artifact in the center of the crater. I'm sure of it. At first she was ecstatic about seeing her mother. It had been, Altman realized, an almost religious experience for her, in a way that it hadn't been for him. For the rest of the night she was manic, elated. But by the next morning her mood had begun to turn. She was moody, depressed. Why can't she be here all the time? She asked. Why can't she stay with me? But it's not her, said Altman. It seems like her, but it isn't. It's hallucination. It was her, said Ada, with a sense of conviction that worried him. And I need her. I need her back. And just when Ada was at her most depressed and listless, her mother came back. Altman was in the room at the time, beside her, and saw it as well. Only what he saw was not her dead mother, but his own dead sister. They both agreed that something had happened, but had happened and experienced it differently. They were each shown whomever they wanted to see. The words spoken were different as well, phrased to fit the way the person herself spoke when she was alive. But it all, with a little interpretation, fit into the idea of one crowning event, convergence, though the dead were less clear about what exactly that was, or what could be done to stop it. Altman was suspicious. It's not real, he tried to tell Ada. We're being manipulated, used. I know what I saw, said Ada. It was real as anything I've ever seen. She wanted her mother back from the dead so much that she wouldn't listen. It was strange, Altman thought. That hallucination, or vision she had called it, was constant for her, always her mother, when his kept changing from one loved one to another, but perhaps it was simply because he was too skeptical to accept hallucinations as anything but delusion, and so it had to keep trying different strategies. As he'd been ordered, Altman told Stevens about his hallucinations, mentioning Ada's as well. Stevens just recorded what he said and nodded. He seemed tired, overworked. "What do you think it all means?" Altman asked. Stevens shrugged. "You and your girlfriend are not the only ones having them," he said. "Others are experiencing the same thing, and more frequently. Only dead people, loved ones, the sort of people you'd want to take seriously. Some people like you, they're believing they're hallucinations. Others, like Ada, they're believing there's something more. Whatever it is, it wants us to do something," Altman said, "but it doesn't know how to communicate it properly." "Not only that," said Stevens, in one of his rare moments of openness, "our hospital ward is full of people suffering from psychosis, and the suicide rate is sky high. Either at once a lot of us mad or dead, or what it's saying is literally destroying us." There was, he noticed, a shift in the way people interacted with one another aboard the floating compound. There was a growing feeling that something was happening, something that they couldn't begin to understand. Some people began clumping together in groups, sharing their experiences with the dead, speculating that the boundaries between heaven and earth had been broken. Others dismissed them as a function of the signal emitted by the marker, similar to a drug trip. Others seemed to be having a bad trip. They became withdrawn, confused, even violent. He was in the laboratory, starting the moments when the signal pulse was strongest, and trying to see if his hallucinations were occurring at those times, when he noticed through the open door people rushing down the hall. He stepped out to get a closer look, saw at the far end against the door, surrounded by a crowd now, a scientist named Martyr, someone he didn't know very well. He had a laser scalpel in one hand, very close to his own throat. "Now, Martyr," another scientist was trying to say. "Put the scalpel down." "Stay away," Martyr shouted. His eyes were wild, darting about his head. "Just keep your distance. You're with them, I know it." "Who's them, Martyr?" the man asked. "Put the scalpel down. I'm sure we can sort this all out." "Go get the guards," someone said. But Martyr overheard. "No guards," he shouted, and lunged forward, cutting off two of his friend's fingers with the laser scalpel. The man screamed and fell backward, and Martyr turned in a circle, brandishing the scalpel until everyone stood a little distance from him. He brought the scalpel back to his throat. "It's too late," he hissed. "We're all dead, or as good as dead. We can't escape. Get out now before we become one of them." And suddenly, with a swift, vicious movement, he whipped the scalpel through his neck. The wound was bloodless at first, slightly cauterized by the scalpel, but then the blood began to pulse, a thick jet of it spurting from several carotids. He gave a ghastly, gurgling scream, the air hissing strangely from his mouth and from his slit windpipe, and then took a step forward and collapsed. A few moments later, guards were there, covering up the body and hustling everyone away. "What happened?" Altman asked one of the scientists passing by the door. "Martyr went crazy," the man said. "He started screaming in the lab about the end of the world, and then he stabbed Westerman through the arm with a broken pipette. Then he grabbed the laser scalpel and ran here." "But why?" The man shrugged. "Who knows," he said. "It's just like when that guard shot a technician last week for no reason, then shot himself. These things just happen." He sometimes found himself on the edge of a group, listening to them expounding. The focus was usually on the marker, the name that Altman had heard to call it from his hallucination, having caught on with others as well. Altman didn't know who had first suggested that the marker was the product of alien technology, but the idea had caught on quickly. Now many of the researchers in the facility were convinced of it. There was a good deal of speculation about the origins of the marker, why it had been left there, what it meant, and whether they should tamper with it or leave it alone. One day, on the way back from his room down to the submarine bay, he found the hallway blocked. 6 or 7 people were gathered in the hallway, a group consisting of both scientists and guards. One of the 6, an older scientist, addressed the others. When he saw Altman coming, he fell silent. "Excuse me," said Altman, and slowly pushed through, the people shuffling out of the way and allowing him to squeeze past. It was strange. He was sure, interrupting something, but something wasn't sure what. Mutiny, maybe? The answer came when, just as he reached the edge of the group, the scientist began again. You must free your flesh and unify with the divine nature of its construction. A religious meeting of some kind, some crazed sect, no doubt, or perhaps members of different faiths getting together. He hadn't seen anything resembling a chapel in the floating compound, though Altman, not a religious man himself, hadn't realized this until now. He slowed, kept listening, trying to get a sense of who these people were. We must lose ourselves to find ourselves, said the scientist. Convergence is the only salvation, for I hear this in its whispers. Unless you can understand what it means to become one with the marker, you shall not have eternal life. The word marker, coming at a moment when he expected to hear a deity referenced, made Altman shiver. He continually hurried on. Only once he left the corridor did he realize that what he had witnessed was the beginning of some kind of new religion, this one based on the marker. It scared the shit out of him. In the days that followed, he overheard such talk more and more frequently, even more from Ada. Their opposing philosophies of the marker had come between them to an even greater degree than his unwillingness to stop doing things that might be dangerous. In a matter of a few short days, their notions of the world had become radically different. He realized at a certain point that they'd begun to avoid each other when they could. He still loved her, but he felt like he was losing her and didn't know how to get her back. Despite that, he was still surprised the first time he saw her on the fringes of one of those religious groups. Can we talk about this? He asked her, drawing her away from the crowd. I've been trying to talk to you about it, she said, but you just won't see the light. That's not talking, he said. That's preaching. They fought and fought, and Ada threatened to leave him. Even though he knew it was hopeless, that the relationship was in the process of dying, he agreed at least to hear her out. It was in listening to Ada that he began to get a clear sense of the believers' philosophy. They believed the marker to be divine, that it had been sent to them by God for humanity's benefit. We must believe in it and bend ourselves to its will, and then it will heal us, it will unify us and make us free and perfect. A strange mishmash of Christianity and paganism. It gave people something to hold on to in the face of the uncertainty and anxiety about the marker. Soon, Altman realized a new problem would emerge, as everyone on board, just like he and Ada, would be split between the believers and unbelievers. At first, Markov's guards ignored this, but as the groups became larger and more dynamic, they started to break them up, presumably on Markov's orders. But this only seemed to make people want to meet more frequently. It seemed an indication to many that there was something the military didn't want them to know. Meanwhile, plans to raise the marker continued. There was still a great deal of excitement, but had been metamorphosed into fervor on one side and apprehension on the other. Altman went down the bathescape twice more, both times alone, both times to supervise the robots attaching cables to the net that now contained the marker. Twice more, hovering near the ocean floor, he hallucinated Ada's mother. She repeated what she had said before, but it was no clearer this time. Where exactly shall we leave the marker? He asked her. The marker, as long as it lives within the sphere of gravitation, is where it must be. What the hell does that mean, he wondered. What's going to happen to us? He asked. You must not study it. If you do, you will succumb to convergence, she declared. Perhaps it is already too late. If we converge, what will happen? You shall finally begin from the new beginning. What does that mean? You shall be made one, and you shall lose yourself. He came back up to the surface feeling even more confused than before. He thought maybe the believers were right, that the marker was something divine. He thought, what if it's a homing beacon from an alien race, something to call them down to us, the forerunner of our own destruction? No, he was not the sort of person who was easily given to belief. He didn't know if he believed in God, and he certainly didn't believe in organized religion. Late one night, while he was getting ready for bed, Ada was nowhere to be seen, probably hiding from him. A knock came on the door. He went to the door. Who is it? He asked. Field, said a voice through the door. Let me in. Field? Why would Field want to see him? He hadn't gotten along well since they'd first come to the floating facility. When he opened the door, it was to find Field flanked by a dozen others. What is it? Asked Altman upon seeing it. We need to talk to you, said Field. Please let us come in. Not knowing what else to do, Altman did. They filed solemnly in, one by one, standing in place or sitting on the bed, filling the room. "We've come to ask you to lead us," said Field. "Lead you? Lead you in doing what?" "You've seen it," said someone from the crowd. Altman didn't see who. "Seen what?" "The marker," said Field. "You spent more time around it than anyone else. We know what happened in the Batscape. When it killed others, it left you alive. We know when it converses with you. You have been chosen." "How do you know what happened on the Batscape?" Altman asked. "We have brethren not only among the general population," said Field. "We have many close to Markov. You understand more than anyone else. You must guide us. You are a prophet. It is the marker's will." "Let me get this straight," said Altman. "You want me to lead you as a prophet of your religion?" A rumble of assent shivered through them. For Altman, time seemed to have slowed to an excruciatingly slow pace. He moved back until he was touching the wall. "Did Ada put you up to this?" he asked. "Please," said Field. "Tell us what to do." "No way," said Altman. A collective groan arose from the crowd. "Are we not worthy?" asked Field. "What must we do to be worthy?" "I liked you better when all you did was sit at your desk for 8 hours a day," said Altman. "And I didn't like you much then." "You shall lead us," said Field. "You cannot abandon us." "I don't believe in the shit you do," said Altman. They stared at him, astonished. When he looked back at Field, he saw a crafty expression had fallen over his face. "This is a test," he said. "He's testing us." "I'm not testing you," he said evenly. Field smiled. "We understand," he said. "Now is not the time. We shall watch and wait. When the moment comes, we will be ready to come to your side." "I'll say it again," said Altman. "I'm not a believer." "But you will be," said Field. "I know it. You may be a reluctant prophet, but you are a prophet nonetheless. I have seen it in a vision." "Now is not the time," said Altman. "Get the hell out." They filed slowly out, each stopping to lay a hand on his arm or shake his hand, touching him as if he were some sort of good luck charm. His skin was crawling. Chapter 46. He watched from the bathscape as the robotic units finished threading the marker in cables. There it lay before him, bound in trust, but somehow it's still imposing despite its metal net. This is the cause of my problems, he thought, and now my problems are only getting worse. He watched from 5 meters above it as the larger cable, the one running curved up into the darkness into the ship above, grew taut. The Emrovs had dug around the base, but there was no telling if it would come up. In a way, he hoped it wouldn't. He held his breath, the marker sagged lower on the net, and for a moment he thought the net wouldn't hold. It creaked and swayed slowly in that darkness, and they came up with a large grating sound, oddly distorted by the water, and began to rise. He followed it up, relaying messages and corrections to a series of submarines, which in turn relayed them upward into the surface. At first, the marker twisted as it rose, the water naturally channeling around the 2 spirals of the marker and making it turn, creating an invisible whirlpool in its wake. It could, Halpin realized, soon become a problem, tangling the cables, so he slowed the towing down to a snail's pace, and it stopped. After a while, it was moving regularly, ascending slowly but straight upward. This is it, thought Altman. Slowly it rose through the darkness. Only once they were halfway to the surface did he realize he hadn't experienced any hallucinations. His head, for the first time in months, didn't ache. He checked the readings, found that the signal had stopped broadcasting around the time it began to rise. Maybe we've disconnected it, he thought. Perhaps we're doing something right. Perhaps this was what we were supposed to do. Maybe it was transmitting so that we would find it and bring it to the surface. Maybe that was its purpose. For a moment he felt reassured. Then unanswered questions began to assail him. If that were really the case, then why would there have been any hallucinations at all? Why would they affect people most strongly when they were close to the marker itself? It's almost as if it wants to keep us at a distance. And what do the dead's warnings of convergence have to do with any of it? Maybe we've done something right, he thought, or maybe we've done something very wrong. Soon they would get close to the surface, and the marker would be drawn onto the freighter itself. Already the water had changed, the darkness receding, and he could see the marker more clearly than he'd ever seen it before. In the lights, it was even more impressive, covered with symbols and laterally striated by dark lines cut into the rock. He still could see no evidence of joints or cracks. It seemed like it was formed out of one single large rock. When the station was 500 meters above them, Markov ordered the ascent stopped. "What's wrong?" asked Altman over the audio channel. "This wasn't how it was planned." "Thank you for your help at this point, Mr. Altman," said Markov. "A deep-water craft is no longer required. Return to the submarine bay." "What?" "I think I'll stay here, Markov, if you don't mind," said Altman. There was silence for a long time, and then the vid screen crackled to life. He saw Markov's face. "You've been an asset to me at this point. Now you risk becoming expendable." "What's going on?" Altman asked. "That's none of your concern," said Markov. He opened his mouth and closed it again. Markov, he knew, was capable of having the bathscape torpedoed. Perhaps it was time to flee, dive deep and head for somewhere safe. As if he could read Altman's mind, Markov added, "Do you need something tangible to convince you to behave? Your girlfriend?" For a moment he hesitated. In a way, he had already lost Ada to the marker, to her desire to be one of them. It was just a matter of time before he lost her completely. All the same, he still loved her, and couldn't live with her being dead because of him. With a sigh, he cut the signal and began to head for the surface, leaving behind the marker, hanging in its gigantic metal net. On the way up, he passed a trio of submarines dragging a new cable. He led back, he could see, to the gigantic below-water chamber of the floating compound, the chamber that had been off-limits to everybody except for Markov's inner circle ever since they had arrived. What Markov had planned, Altman had no idea. Thank you, that was part 9 of Dead Space Martyr. Thank you for listening, and good night.